Mr. Stradley, who's been excused. First item, excuse me. First item of business is approval of the minutes. If you read the minutes of April 28th and June 9th, anybody make a motion to accept or any additions or corrections?
I'll make a motion to accept.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Any opposed?
Since I wasn't a member of the commission, I'll just abstain on that.
That's fine. All right. Item 3 is public comment.
Excuse me, I know you don't have your cell phones near it, but it possibly might be one of your laptops doing it. Could you back those away from the microphones a little, please?
Got a laptop over there.
Nothing but noise. Thank you.
All right. Please turn your laptops down. Mark, you're the only public. Do you have anything to say?
There's still one set of minutes. Did you just approve both of them or just the first one?
What's
the
that?
June 9th minutes?
That was both.
That was for both? Okay.
Yeah. Well, Mark, you got to say something there.
Mark Mucher, 617 Indian Lilac Road. The only thing I can think of right now is that lately I've been a stickler for announcement of new and departed commission members, so I'd appreciate it if you would introduce your new member.
Oh, all right. We have Bob Auerter,
Close enough.
who is the alternate from Indian River Shores, who's a new member. New business. I don't know if we want to put Chef under new business. I guess since we had a headline that said something about OUC, although I understand from the Finance Commission that we're still in negotiations.
Yeah, good morning. Thanks, Mr. Chairman, members. I'm glad to be back, as always. I'm really busy, and I work hard, and I don't read the newspapers. So I was somewhat surprised yesterday to learn that apparently newspapers down here had reported that there was actually a signed new contract with OUC. That is false, period, end. We met with OUC, the mayor, city manager, and I met with OUC's CEO, their general counsel, and their vice president for business operations on July 30th, so it was 12 days ago from now. And we came to a handshake deal on the basic structure of a reworked deal. It is the 8-year term, so we would be out of it at the end of calendar 2023. The rest of the terms are mostly those in the November 25th proposal, as modified by certain additional concessions that we got in February, including a lower demand level to start the computation of our billing demand. And we got some additional economic concessions. We are working with them. I am meeting with them this afternoon. Bill Harrington and I are meeting with them this afternoon in Orlando. We are working with them to try to figure out what the structure of the capacity payments is going to be. And to give you the general idea, the old capacity payments did this. Well, they did this and then plateaued. The November 25th capacity payments started a bit lower, and they did this, and then they plateaued. The new ones have some additional concessions reflected in them, but they would do essentially the same thing, but we have the option of working with them to tilt that time trajectory of those rates. What that would enable us to do is have more stable rates for the next several years. I mean, conceivably, you could even carry it out for the whole 8 years. I don't know if you want to try to do that. The trade-off is that the more you hold rates down in the out years, the more you hold rates down in the out years, the higher the rates have to be in the early years. It is a wrestling match. It is a dilemma. We are working on it. And that's kind of where we are. And the reason it's particularly difficult is that, as I'm fond of saying, you have to count on everything else holding still, and everything else won't hold still. The other utility costs, the distribution costs, the administrative and general costs, and so on. The other costs, which comprise 30% plus or minus of our total cost, it's $36 out of 126 right now, are going up. They're going up every year from now into the beyond a 5-year budget horizon. Natural gas costs are going up. Other fuel costs are going up. If we knew that the price of natural gas was going to remain constant, the price of coal was going to remain constant, and all the other costs would remain constant, then I'd only have one variable to worry with, and that would be whether to levelize the capacity cost component of the base rates. And even then, we have to count on sales holding still. If sales go up, then costs are lower per unit. If sales don't grow as projected, and we're being pretty conservative in the sales projections, then costs are higher than projected, and you undercover, and then you got to come back the next year and raise rates. So it's like I said, it's a wrestling match, but we're working on it.
Attorney Wright, at our last meeting in June, you said that the single, I think, greatest variable was transmission availability. Is there any new information on that?
Yes, and I'm so glad you asked. What I meant to say was that it was the greatest determinant of when we would be able to start the deal. And one of the best things about the handshake that we reached with OUC 2 weeks ago is that we will be able to start the new lower base rate capacity costs October 1st of this year, whether or not the transmission is finalized. We currently have the capability of delivering 100 megawatts under our FPL transmission contract. The combination of the 84 megawatts of base product and 54 of peak product is 138. And there's some additional available on FPL, but not the full amount. And so that was a potential holdup. And in fact, I think it was only 2 weeks ago. It may not even been 2 weeks ago. It may have been, I think it was the day after we met with OUC. I got a call from one of their senior transmission folks who said that, in our meeting with OUC, they agreed that we could start October 1 regardless. So that took that constraint out of play. The better new news, and it's not definitive at this point, is that it appears, according to senior OUC transmission folks, relatively likely that we will be able to start taking the full amount, the base product and the peaking product from OUC effective October 1st through implementation of what they call an operational plan or an operational contingency protocol. Basically, it involves reswitching certain transmission circuits in the event that a certain contingency occurs. I'm going to back up. Under normal conditions, we could deliver the whole thing today. Not a problem. Transmission planning is typically done on what they call a single contingency basis. If a significant component, a generator or a transmission line, goes out of service, then the system has to still be able to deliver everything. There's a particular contingency, and I don't remember which one it is, but there's a particular contingency which, if it occurs, would leave us unable to deliver the full 84 plus 54 as the system is presently configured. It looked like FPL was going to have to install some additional transmission capability, some capacitors, or an additional transformer, or both. But it appears that we can actually solve the problem by this switching protocol. That is in the hand. The way that works is OUC has identified this. Ted Fletcher has signed off on it. He thinks it works fine for us. We have to get with FPL's transmission planners to make sure that it's satisfactory to them. If that group of folks agrees, then they will write up this operational plan, and once they agree to it, basically they give it to the system, the Florida Reliability Coordinating Council reliability coordinator, and say, if this contingency occurs and you need to, you may use this switching plan.
Do you think it's likely that they will agree?
Yes. Yeah. But
so
that's based on feedback from the senior folks at OUC. But it looks good. It's not across the finish line, but it looks good.
Okay, so it's fair to say that it's not, no, it's no longer an issue.
It's no longer an issue in terms of getting lower rates on October 1st.
Okay. Thank you.
That is for sure true, whether we fix this operational issue or not.
Mr. Wright, if I'm understanding you, there's still a significant amount of the agreement that has to be finalized, right? The capacity segment and so forth?
Principally the capacity payments, yes, sir.
Okay. I guess I'm having a little trouble understanding the negotiating strategy that went on. It seemed to me that one reason why OUC came back to the table was the willingness of the electric utility to go out and put out RFPs. Yet we canceled the RFPs. It seemed that was one of our best bargaining chips against OUC without nailing down an agreement. So I'm just having trouble understanding the process that you guys are using, because now obviously we can't go back and put RFPs out again because nobody's going to think that we're going to turn around and execute them. So I'm trying to understand what the strategy was here.
Well, the strategy was to continue negotiating with OUC to try to get a better deal. We did that. What we have is a handshake deal that I personally would take to my bank, and that is on a particular pot of dollars that we can work with. What I was trying to explain a few minutes ago is that, and it's better than the payments that were in the November 25th proposal. And even as modified by the February proposal didn't change the rates, it changed the calculation of the billing demand in a way that saved us some additional money. So it includes that, and it includes not only the prior concessions, but some additional economic concessions. I view this as a good faith negotiation on the part of both parties. I don't necessarily impute that OUC came back to the table because we put the RFP out, but that's not my call. They're out there. I will tell you that I have had a dialogue going on with OUC's general counsel for a long period of weeks, like months, 3 months, saying, we need to get our guys in the room, Chris. And finally, we were able to accomplish that on July 30th, and we talked through our respective needs, and we got a better deal than we went in with. Okay. And all things considered, shorter term, start October 1st, which is a big deal, because that means we can really see some results October 1st, and avoiding what I have been colloquially calling the train wreck that might have been the litigation and counter-litigation, suits, countersuits, et cetera, that could have resulted between us and OUC in another scenario. We all agreed this was a good deal.
Okay, in the last meeting, if I remember correctly, you said that even under the best of circumstances, we're only going to narrow about 1/5 of the gap of the electricity costs that we currently have relative to Florida Power and Light. Based on the terms you've nailed down so far, what's your estimation of what that reduction in rates will be, that narrowing of the gap? Is it still 1/5? Is it 1/3? What's your best guess at this point?
Well, it's in that order of magnitude.
1/5.
It's in that order of magnitude, but it depends. And I don't mean to be equivocal, even though I used to be an economist, but it depends on how we structure the implementation of what we've got to work with. If we take greater reductions in the early years, if we take the increasing trajectory, the decrease in 16 and 17 would be more than 1/5. If we did a complete flattening, it would decline to being something in that order of magnitude. And I can't tell you would it be 17% or 23% or 22%, but it's probably going to be in the range of 1/4 or 1/5 if we do something like that. And I'm interested to hear we're interested to hear from y'all on this. In that, would you rather see more sustainable all-in rates for the next 5-6 years, or would you rather see a lower first cost? And the consensus.
Personally, I would do a present value calculation. That's the only way you can go out and do it, and assign some interest rate to it and figure out what makes sense. So
sure, and right, got it.
One thing, capacity cost is one of the big things. And Jim, I got a question of you. Why can't we, when we know we're going to a peak, with instant messaging we got today, go out to all our members and say, hey, we can save money if you'll turn off your pool pump and your water heater for this period of time? Because we did that when we got out of the FMPA contract, and we actually lowered it about 5 megawatts by doing that.
We have discussed that. That has been part of our discussion at the negotiating table, and the fact that where we set our peak of what we're doing. As a matter of fact, at staff meeting, we talked about that. One of the things we're doing is going to be installing a new generator for this facility that'll carry it 100%, which wasn't even counted the last time when you were going through the CROD. We understand and know that Publix, because they did a deal with the city of Leesburg, have been able to use their generating capacity to shave the peak. Also, the hospitals, another potential that we can do here. Instant messaging and the reliability of people turning off their pumps at their pools for the single-family residential, I think that's more of an unreliable process.
Yeah, but if you don't try it, you won't know.
That's true. But the key is you know, our overall peak was 210 or 211, something like that, and we're going to 191, 192. So we can close in on that in order to save money. But the answer to your question is, yes, we are discussing that. We understand that that really is a part of these negotiations and discussions.
And we are working on that in any combination of utilizing standby generation that's owned by the city, contracting with customers who have their own standby generation to fire up when we're getting close to a peak, other what we call interruptible or curtailable service where a customer gets a modest price break in return for reducing load when required, and the PR program that you suggest, Herb. Other cities have used that. Others have called it Beat the Peak, and they get on the radio and the TV with public service announcements and say, look, we're heading for a peak between 4 and 7 p.m. tonight, or whatever it is, or 6 and 8, 5 and 8 tomorrow morning. If it's winter, put your thermostat down to 65 when you go to bed instead of 68. It'll make a difference. And we're definitely thinking about that right now. We're focused on getting the arrangement with OUC finalized, and we're heading into a period of the year in which we're unlikely to sustain a peak. But our target is to have a meaningful demand reduction plan in place before November, because December is the first month in which we might really have something happen.
You said something about a generator? You're going to install a generator?
For this facility. We have one right now, but it's a partial.
You mean for this building?
For this building.
Okay. Not in the power plant. You're talking about this.
No. It'd be
okay.
Bad. I mean, to keep the power plant lit and no power coming out of it wouldn't be a good plan. But for example, water and wastewater happen to be some of our largest users. So we have a lot that we control internally as well. But that is part of our discussion, and one of our issues in trying to keep our prices low is to shave that peak, which is a cost factor to us.
Well, yeah, because everybody complains about their bill. If they did that, their bill would be less.
Yeah. You turn off your electricity and your bill's going to be less.
Right. Anybody else?
Yes, actually, I have a question about the bargaining. The letters that went back and forth seemed a bit threatening. Did OUC believe that we, in fact, had a right to put out the RFPs? And if so, how do threatening letters generate goodwill in bargaining behavior?
I don't think we ever resolved the question whether they believed we had a right to put out the RFP. We believed that we had a right to put out the RFP. We told them so. We did so. Threatening letters, in my view of the world, don't help things. That's why, as I said a few minutes ago, I truly been trying for some period of time to get the mayor and OUC CEO in the same room to see if we can't sit down and work this out. other events occurred during that time, and I continued during and after the exchange of the letters my very professional relationship with my counterpart at OUC, and I just kept saying, Chris, I think it really might be a good thing to get our guys in the same room. Let's see if we can do this. And it worked out.
Well, in your opinion, it took the letters, though, in order to get everyone in the same room. Is that is that the usual procedure?
Oh, I'm gonna answer the first question first by saying I don't know if that's what got everybody in the same room or not. I'm gonna answer your second question by saying yes. Yeah, okay. I mean, you know the old saying, cases settle on the courthouse steps. Everybody screams and hollers. They fire motions. They conduct discovery and take deposition, and they call each other names in the press, and they call each other names and all this stuff. And you get to the night before or the morning of, and hey, we got a settlement. Get out the guitars. We're going to sing Kumbaya. And I've been there. I mean, I've done that on literally hundreds of millions of dollars electric rate cases. We can't do that. We can't. Well, we're not going to do that. Well, we can't. We possibly. Well, we're not going to do that. And it's down to the wire. And lo and behold, night before. Okay. Oh, okay. We can do this. I'm sorry.
That's okay. But
don't do this.
They're calling. They're on the phone right now. The goodwill has evaporated. No, I'm
sorry.
Seriously. Seriously.
I forgot to turn it to vibrate. But truly, that's how it works.
Would you say currently a state of goodwill exists?
Yes.
Thank you.
I'd like to ask another question about that peak issue.
Mm-hmm.
What does it cost to put in a generator to run the entire building? And has anyone considered solar as an alternative?
No, we did not consider solar. What we did is that we put in a generator to replace what we already had. And I can't recall what that number is. We did award the contract for the purchase. But solar, you got to understand, is during the daytime, you'd have to have battery backup and that kind of stuff if you were really trying to hit, because some of our peaks are at odd times when the sun's not shining. For example, we're a winter peaker. And so it's
at nighttime.
At nighttime, could be at night.
And all of the city's computer resources are in this building, all the servers and billing servers, so it's not just the air conditioning and the lights.
That's correct. Right. And then the heat and everything else, you have to sort of keep the place conditioned.
Yeah, the way it's been going, it's not very good. All right. Mark, you have a question?
Yes, I do. Getting back to the transmission issue and questions and the capacity charges kicking off October 1st, the 800-pound gorilla in the room in my mind is whether that allows us to shut down the power plant, 1, 2, all 3 units. And when would that be? My concern, so I'll let you explain.
The answer is yes. It will allow us to shut down all of Big Blue. Ms. Lawson and Mr. Fletcher have been working on trying to figure out what that does exactly timing-wise. But we can shut down 4 units. We've shut down 3 and 4. We can shut down 1 and 2. If we can't deliver the balance of the peaking capacity from OUC, we would need to keep Unit 5 operational for a period of time. If, as it appears, we are able to deliver the full amount of the base and peaking product, that is the 84 plus the 54 of peaking product from OUC effective October 1st, we can shut down Unit 5 effective October 1st as well. Whether that will be the exact date is kind of up to Ted, I think, more than anyone else, but that is an operational assumption. There will still be some costs associated with winding down at Big Blue into fiscal 16, and that's what Cindy and Ted are working on. If we can't deliver the full amount, then we have to figure out whether there's another transmission path to get the power from someplace else to us to where we could shut down Unit 5, or we might have to keep Unit 5 operational to cover. It's a differential of 22 megawatts. Unit 5 is 28. We might have to keep it operational for some period of months, but we do save a lot of money by shutting down 1 and 2. But the transmission request is that we would shut down all 5 units, and that is the process under which it's being evaluated. And like I said, it looks good that we'll be able to solve it with the operational plan to where we can do so.
Hey, Jim, one quick question. You were talking about the hospital.
Yes.
I'm not sure under NFPA 99-110 whether they can use that for peaking or not.
You can over time. You're right. I think you're referring to the air quality issues.
No, well, it's air quality, but also the time, yeah.
Right. But the answer to the question is they probably have startup times that they have to test their generator anyway. If we could work around the testing of the generator to coincide with peaking time. I mean, I think there's ways of doing it because we know that it's been done in other locations, and it's just a matter of the contractual agreement that you have and the incentives given to them for operation of that. But I believe we could work around a lot of it, at least to shave the small peak periods that we would have. For example, if we're buying 190 megawatts, our peak this summer has been 155. So we've got a pretty good margin now. Of course, we are a winter peaker, and we have gone to that 210, 211, as I've been reminded by our folks on several occasions. But that's maybe once out of every 5 or 6 years, knock on wood. And the way we're trying to construct this contract is that's the megawattage over and above. That's where we would have our additional cost, not the whole delivery. If that stands true, then we got to remember whatever we put in there to solve peaking is cost justified by what we would potentially pay under that scenario.
Okay.
But we think there's enough generation through what businesses and industries have in our area to help us substantially. The fact that we got through the CROD and the utility director at the time did a very good job of shaving that peak over a longer period of time than what would be required of us now. I think makes a substantial difference.
Okay. Thank you. Mark, you had something else?
Yes, Mark Muture again. I'm more than a little bit confused now because it seems like Chef's numbers of 130, 140 are a lot different than Jim's numbers of, I forget what they were, 160, 210, something like that. So I don't know how those fit together. But I had a more general comment, and that is that it just seems to me, and I love our linemen and our T&D, and they do the best job they possibly can, but it seems to me that we've got such political pressure to lower rates that this whole deal is being designed around not making the FPL transmission upgrade suggestions, which, in my limited opinion, is affecting our reliability. We've got a lot of reliability upgrades. We've been talking about capacitors and switches and transformers and things to be replaced, but those are down the road. And it almost seems like the reason we're not doing it now is because they cost money, and we got to get these rates down. Rates are one thing, reliability is another. I suppose I can be without power for, an hour every couple of weeks, but it's not what we're used to. It's not what we signed up for, and it kind of all seems political to me. So that's just a general comment.
just as a response to that, we do have 2 big contracts on the agenda for the 18th, which we're doing the modifications. We have talked about the capacitors that would help us conform to this transmission upgrade. We did take a period of time in which operational maintenance was deferred. When we really thought we were going to closing with FP&L, we could not justify making the reinvestment into the system at that time. Once it was declared that we're still searching, and hopefully we'll find an option to be able to close out, but we are a going concern, so we have been making those investments into the infrastructure. Example will be our 69 lines. We just redid a lot of the transmission of that in order to make sure that we have the reliability of the circuit around our system. We've made several modifications to 4 of our substations, and again, we have 2 major contracts, one of them $600,000 on the agenda for Tuesday, the 18th, and that is really the transmission and distribution upgrades and modifications in order to make sure we do have that reliability. But if you look at our reliability numbers over time, we are one of the best in the electric utility business. Now, that being said, one of the reasons is because we have a very dense service area and we're able to respond very well. And the city has done an extremely good job over time in doing the reliability of having the backbone of the 69, which helps us be able to switch substations on a pretty frequent basis if we need to, if we have issues in one substation or another. One of our biggest issues with reliability now, squirrels. You got squirrels in mating season, and they fry pretty quick when they jump into a substation or into a transformer somewhere. We're also, with the rain, the frogs. We're starting to see frogs getting experience in the electrification business too. So we are getting that. And then we have the overriding, which happens in the city of Vero Beach, and it really happens throughout our service area because we are very tree sensitive. And you may have read a letter to the editor in Sunday where FP&L, they go in, it's a take no mercy and cut out trees. We, on the other hand, when we get into somebody's backyard, we have to respond to what their whims and wishes are, but it only takes one big wind and a heavy rain, and the line goes down, and then all of a sudden trimming trees becomes pretty natural, and nobody has any problem with that. So, unfortunately, it is caused by outages. But our reliability, just to make sure everybody understands, we are continuing to reinvest in our system, primarily in our distribution and transmission system, but we have put substantial money, as you know, into the generation capacity because we have to keep that reliability to a standard that's acceptable by industry standards.
Thank you. Anything else? Otherwise, we go on to reuse water. Rob?
Good morning, Commission. On the agenda this morning is reuse water, and I guess Herb put it on to see where we are. And at the last council meeting, I more or less announced that we really aren't doing anything with the reuse water installations. We've been busy with the step system. We also have our RO plant expansion and the solid facility that we're looking at building at the wastewater plant and some waterline projects at the airport. We've reduced our staffing over the last 5 or 6 years from 80-something employees down to 50. So we don't have the staff to do anything for the next really couple of years on reuse. One of the issues that we came across when we installed the canal pumping system was that while we modeled everything, it looked real good that the pump station would be able to produce quite a bit of water. However, when we put it online, some of the lift stations in those areas, those pumps are probably worn. So when we try to maximize the pump station, we have backups on the gravity sewer system. So we're studying that now, finding out which pump stations need to be upgraded, and we'll address those lift stations in the next couple of years. And hopefully once we get the step system underway and good number of installations, then we can revisit the reuse system again.
I'm just, the city, there's a lot of areas that don't have reuse water, and so we're using potable water, which to me is a waste. And even, there's a lot of talk these days of what we're going to do with water. You got FP&Ls talking about it. Jim says this isn't going to affect our amount of water, but, in Central Florida, their ponds are drying up because the aquifer isn't doing what it's supposed to do. So I'd just like to put on the agenda that we raise up this reuse water for people in the city into a higher level. I know your step system is doing well. You're working hard on it. That's good. That's good for the lagoon. But I still think we need, as I say, I've had a reuse water line under my driveway for 20 years, but I haven't been able to connect to it. So I'd like to. So that's why I brought it up, because everybody, even I got a magazine here. What the thing is, first thing on there is water. And they say the next wars are going to be about water. So we need to think about that. Judy?
So, Rob, if I understand what you're saying, let me make sure I understand what you're saying about the canals. And I understand that the canal water is your supplement when you don't have sufficient reuse. So are you saying that there's something wrong with the pumping system so you can't always count on it?
No. What we looked at was when we built the pumping system, we looked at, okay, well, we'll meet peak demands with it, but then also we may be able to withdraw, say, another 300,000 gallons a day of water out of it and provide reuse to additional customers that have been on a waiting list.
Okay.
What I'm saying is that we can meet the peak demand, but we can't meet the peak plus the peak from an additional users that is a 300,000 gallon a day base that may be now, as a peak user, another 500,000 gallons of water use. So we withdraw roughly 1.2 million out of the canal when we need to. But to be able to bring on 300,000 as a base, I would need to be at, say, 1.7 million capacity to bring on additional users. I can't do that at this point. The station was designed that way. However, I'll give you an example. When we turn the pump on and we try to get 1.7 million out of it, then I have to run it during peak usage when everybody's using their water and everything else. Well, then we have backups in Dodgertown facilities, and we have backups at Airport West. So it's the lift stations that are there now seeing a higher pressure in those force mains, and most of it, I believe, is that those pumps are worn. Over time, if you have a pump operating for 15 years, say, they're not pumping clear liquid. They're pumping, oils, greases, grit, everything else, and the impellers wear out on it. So when we modeled it, we looked at it and made the assumption that they were pumping at capacity, and they're not. So until we can go in there, find out what the problems are, and upgrade those stations so that we can fully utilize that canal pump station to what we intended it to be, we really can't take on additional customers at this point. It's on the horizon. It's a long-term goal of ours. It's just right now our plate is full with what we have going on. And I agree, water is going to be an issue. Look at what's happening in California now. Florida's a little different the way they're laid out, but if we keep growing and we have industry, we're going to have issues with water demands.
Kind of relevant to reuse, but on another angle of it, I know the Central Florida, St. John's Water Management District has a Central Florida Water Initiative. And one of their big pushes is to promote reuse water, and particularly for golf courses. But I thought it was interesting that their nitrogen level that's acceptable for that is 3 milligrams of nitrogen per liter.
I don't follow that. I mean, normally an advanced wastewater treatment plant will produce 3 milligrams per liter. Older plants, they really weren't designed around nitrogen removal. While you get nitrogen removal, they weren't set up and to get those lower discharges.
Right.
Those lower discharges were set up and designed around so that when you discharge to water bodies, you don't necessarily affect the water bodies. Now, I don't know why. I mean, it may be just something that is a statement in there because maybe a lot of Central Florida is new and they're new facilities, and maybe that's what they produce.
Actually, they're going in and retrofitting old sewage treatment plants to get those nitrogen levels down because they feel like that's the environmentally correct level to be putting out. So I just wanted to bring that up because I have concerns about ours, as you know, that our nitrogen levels are extremely high. And so, somewhere in our long-range planning, we should be, as well as looking at providing these additional sources of reuse water, I think we have to really consider the nitrogen that's in our reuse water and whether we can do something to retrofit our plant to reduce those nitrogen levels and phosphorus for that matter, because both of those numbers are extremely high.
We've had this discussion before.
I know.
My philosophy is a little bit different.
Well, and it's expensive, correct?
Well, it's expensive, but my philosophy is if we educate our reuse users so that you're not creating runoff, then in essence what you're doing, just like these golf courses, they prefer the nitrogen and phosphorus levels in there because then they can cut back on the amount of fertilizer that they use. So in the case of the Rio Mar golf course, they always called us routinely to find out what levels of nitrogen was in the reuse water, and then they would go ahead and fertilize accordingly because they looked at it and saw how much nitrogen uptake their golf course was taking, and then they only added what they needed to make sure that it was thriving. I'm not saying all golf courses and all reuse customers do that. A lot of them probably still fertilize just as much on top of their reuse. If they're using reuse water with some of the calculations I looked at, you probably don't, need to go ahead and put any fertilizer on. Now, on the downside of that, if some of them are cutting back on reuse water, then they will have to, go ahead and fertilize to supplement to get the amount they need for a year's time.
Well, in general, I think when you're ponding the reuse water, which is what, our technique, other than putting it out in communities, but I think when you pond the reuse water, there's a really great possibility that it's leaching into the groundwater and leaching into the lagoon and the ocean. And so that's why I believe that this high level of nitrogen should be looked at in the big picture as far as long-range plans. What can we do to upgrade our system and just reduce that nitrogen and phosphorus? And there's ways to do it, and there's funding available to do it because it's a push statewide to, get these levels down.
And I'll check into it. I just haven't heard that comment before. I know about 2 years ago, I did a reuse class that they held, St. John's, South Florida. Everybody got together, and one of the studies that they showed was that in the ponding of reuse water, they had one wastewater plant that was in Central Florida that they studied, they had a lot of holding capacity on their site, and then they had canals that it ran through to other holding capacities, and by the time they got to where their irrigation sources were and spraying it on their irrigation, they were down below the 3 milligrams per liter. Now, that doesn't necessarily support what your comment is in your concern of, what's going on underneath that pond and how is that affecting the groundwater around that area.
Well, particularly since it's on the barrier island where it's a very vulnerable area. I mean, if you're in Central Florida and you're, creating areas for that to trickle through, and there's lots of soil for it to be denitrified. That could be a whole different scenario than when we're on the barrier island and our water table's really shallow.
And the other option is lining ponds.
Lining the ponds, but they're not lined.
Well, no, but which is a lot cheaper than upgrading your wastewater plant.
Ah.
So.
Interesting concept. But then again, that doesn't solve the issue of the homeowners that just have their sprinklers spraying right out into the lagoon or running down their driveway. I mean, and that are also adding fertilizer on top of the reused water because there's a lack of awareness. So
you have to get an education program, just like we talked about with the electric and cutting back during peaking time. You know, it all comes down to education. So,
well, the same thing
and your
with
fertilizer ordinance. You know, I mean, the
same thing with the public people that use the reused water. You see it all over the roads all the time, which is too bad. One thing about, do you check it when it comes out of the main relief canal, when you pump it out, you check the nitrogen levels?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we actually have studied, and we gave some of that information to the county because they had other sites that they had checked, but they didn't really have the main canal data, and I sent a lot of it to Vinnie Burke probably 9 months ago, I think. It was probably far back. But, you know, because we have, and Bill Messersmith, he looks at it from our point of discharge, you know, through lateral E and that kind of stuff. So we kind of take before shots of back at 43rd, and then we also have other sample points that we did, you know, downstream. So, and what we do is...
what are the nitrogen levels in the...
I'd have to look. It was probably, I'm thinking it was close to 1. 1.3, 0.9, you know, it all fluctuated, but I can get that data together. Yeah. I mean, it was...
Well, the county's doing a good job of that. I was over there and I looked down the canal, it's all green. I said, why? And they said, because we leave that stuff in there to take the nitrogen out.
Exactly.
And then I said, well, what happens when the rain comes? Well, I went by there after we had a heavy rain and they had taken all that stuff out.
Right.
So they were doing a good job of that, trying to get it down.
Yeah, they leave it there so that it has nitrogen uptake. Right. And then they pull it out when a big storm's going to come so it doesn't all float down into the lagoon.
So, all right, anybody else? We seem to be the ones that...
I just have a question about STEP while you're here, because I ride my bike through there all the time. What percentage of the houses are hooked up now? I know the last time it was...
It's hard on percentages. If you look on our website, actually, if you go to the city's website and you go down to the bottom and you click on the STEP system, it's an interactive model that shows where it's available and also shows who's hooked up and those that have actually kept their drain field in place and those that haven't. So, and we keep filling that in every time we have a new person come online. Our problem is we didn't anticipate as many failing septic tanks as we now find. And
you mean on when you do the inspection?
We haven't even done inspections because what's happening is we're getting the phone calls. So where we were planning on running down this road and then over to this road, all of a sudden we get a phone call all the way over in this other area. Hey, I got a failing septic tank, and we're jumping over there and hooking that person up, and then coming back and then jumping over to another area and hooking that person up. But I'd say we've been averaging probably 2 connections a week since we started some of this stuff. So, you know, there's still a list of people that you got 2 things going on: new construction and failing septic tanks that, you know, we got to run a half mile of line to pick this person up. Then, of course, after we ran that, everybody along those lines say, well, mine's failing too. So you have other people connecting up, which I'd rather do that than necessarily, you know, because those people are
make the repair.
I don't want the people to go and to make the expense of the repair. And while we're not sticking to a schedule we thought we would, we're providing a good service to the community. So
that's great.
And then more people can hook up too.
Right. But we've engineered and designed and permitted 3 of the 4 basins on the barrier island. So really the only one left, I think, is the old Riamar area that we have to work on. So we're close to half the amount of septic tanks in the city are permitted for construction already.
And so when you run that line in, doesn't some kind of a time frame start where they have, that forgiveness period?
Well,
that must be hard when you're jumping around.
Well, that's going to be the next wave of people. So what I'm doing is once we finish one
so
area,
you haven't sent that letter out.
We're going to send, because we'd rather finish one whole area
right.
and then send it out,
right.
because what's going to happen is now people are holding off until they get that letter, and then once
right.
they get that letter,
then they know the top
now they're going to
ticking.
want to get hooked up because they have that year to take advantage of
right.
the system, the pricing benefits. And so that's going to be the next wave of people that's going to slow me down again.
Okay.
So I'm kind of holding off
on that one, yeah.
Any other questions?
Well, thank you, Rob. Cindy?
Good morning. Well, what you have in front of you here is the third quarter of fiscal 14-15 rate sufficiency update. Basically, what I've done, as I usually do quarterly, is taken the actual revenues, kilowatt-hour sales, and purchase power costs through June 2015, placed them into our model to see how we're looking so far in terms of year-end. As of the end of the second quarter, you might recall we were projecting a year-end surplus of around $900,000, and as we've discussed before, that's a good, comfortable level. It's about 1% of revenue, and we consider that a reasonable cushion for the seasonality of our revenues and sales. But when we put in the actuals through June, what you'll see if you go to the second page of this, the attachment A, which is kind of a summary of all the costs and revenues, is we're currently projecting by year end a surplus a little over $2 million. And so with that, I worked with the city's rate consultant, PRMG, and what we are recommending is that we make a small rate reduction of $1.85 on our bulk power cost charge. If you look at the second and third pages, actually the third is probably better. It's a graphical representation of how this year went. Essentially, in the last 3 months, we've had much higher sales and therefore billed revenue than we originally projected, but our purchase power costs have stayed at or near our original projection. And so that's really the thing that's driving the surplus. And so what we're suggesting is that $1.85 come off of the purchase power cost starting September 1st of 2015, and that would be about a 1.5% decrease on your typical 1,000 kilowatt-hour residential bill. As I said, I've reviewed this with PRMG. They feel comfortable with this recommendation as well. And I think the only other thing to say is obviously this has to be taken in the context of what Mr. Wright said, and it would be sort of a prelude, if you will, to any other reductions that may be available to us for 15-16 once we finalize those revisions to the contracts and also any other optimization efforts. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. What I'd be looking for is your vote to support or deny the staff's recommendation for this decrease on September the 1st. And just as a piece of information, the Finance Commission reviewed this yesterday and voted 4-0 unanimously to support staff's recommendation for this decrease on September the 1st.
You mentioned the optimization study. Has that been completed?
It's been completed partially. Primarily the real the bang for the buck in the optimization study is the closing of the plant. So that's really the one that's kind of inherent in these contract negotiations as well that will produce the greatest savings. The other things they're looking at, I don't know when the rest of the report is due out, but they're not as high an impact as the closing of the plant.
Okay, that study's been going on for a long time. And when's it supposed to be completed?
Well, there actually was a preliminary report released on the closing of the plant, and I don't know if Jim wants to speak to that, but that part of it's actually been done to some degree.
The final report's going to probably be after the implementation of our OUC contract, if the council goes along with the time frame of the OUC. But sometime in November, I believe, is when the final reports to come out. They did the phase one, which we got, that told us that, for example, the power plant property that we're sitting on, there was a lot of speculation you could turn that in and sell it and turn it into capital. The fact of the matter is it's probably going to be a negative number by the time you would try to sell it, if you tried to sell it. It's in the charter, so it'd take a referendum. So that sort of gave us a basis of where we are with the facilities at the power plant site. The second is sort of studying the smaller, but you got to remember this optimization study is only going to affect, and I think Chef used the number 36% or something like that as to the administrative cost. So it's a relatively small percentage of our overall cost of the operation. So there was a perception, I think, on some people's part, the optimization that we did in water and sewer, it was able to bring down costs substantially. This is going to be sort of marginal cost variations in what we're doing.
Hey, didn't we run the power plant about 4 or 5 days, about a month ago?
Yes, sir. I think it was 3 days, and we did run it. And we ran it, ran unit 1, 2, and 5 at that particular time. We've had some operations going on here. I mean, within this fiscal year, I think we ran it because OUC sold some power to the Southern Company at one period. And we've had some peaks where they've taken some of the units off. For example, the rotation of the Stanton plants. They were, for a long time, only running one or the other of the Stanton plants, not both of them, as base load, because they could get it off the market and they could start us up for peaking times and then turn us down. And so, yes, we probably exceeded that 1 or 2% that we historically have had, but I think it's because of the changing nature of the way power is being distributed right now.
What are you going to do when the power plant gets torn down?
Believe it or not, that's going to be someone else's issue. Mine will be a contract that says you've got to deliver 190 megawatts to us, and unfortunately, I'm not going to be really caring where they get that. I have the price and I have the demand. So, but yeah, that again coming back to the transmission study. But we've got to keep in perspective. Overall, in the state, there's new generation being developed and constructed, i.e., Florida Power and Light in Okeechobee County. I mean, and you've got Duke Energy. They're planning new megawatts to come online. So there's a lot of power that's being designed to come onto the grid in the state of Florida, and we are seeing some recovery in the demand, but the potential for supply, I'm not sure anybody sees a forecast that supply and demand are going to equal out somewhere in the foreseeable future.
Okay. Well, Mark, you want to talk before we make a motion?
Just really quickly, and the longer I stand up there, the more questions I get. I have seen the Phase 1 optimization study, and I don't know whether I need, Jim, do I need to look at it again? Were there any numbers in there about the closing or the saving?
No,
I didn't think so. I don't know whether that's forthcoming or if that's something we have to do internally. Another thing, Cindy talked about a rate reduction September 1st, and I don't know if we're going to put in a little slip in the bills or something that explains that, but if we do, and going back to your education responsibilities as a commission, people ask me every day, oh, my fuel adjustment is higher than my power bill. And it's, it's an easily understood misconception. And it's, our terminology is still not real clear. The first line says meter and then gives a meter number on it. So, it looks like those are your metered charges, and they are to some extent. But I think everybody, ourselves included, could use a little better, more clear explanation of how we do that, or else, under the new system, just completely restructure the way we make those explanations. And I had one more thing, but I can't think of it, so I'll let you go. Thank you.
One of the things, just as a follow-up, one of the things that we did talk about when the dust settles here in the fall excuse me, and we actually finalized the rate study, is changing the nomenclature, the description on the bill of that fuel adjustment or whatever it's called now to be purchase power costs, so that people understand it's not just fuel, because we certainly get that phone call in customer service. Well, the price of gas has gone down. Why has this gone up? So we do intend to make that a little clearer when we restructure the bills after we complete the rate study. As far as putting slips in the bills when we lower rates, that's fairly expensive, and we normally get plenty of headlines, so we sort of rely on those as our notification to our customers that the rates are changing, and so that's
trouble with that is sometimes the headlines are not correct.
When we lower them, they don't seem to mention it as much, but I usually only get the big headlines when we have to increase it. But takes time, and it is a little bit expensive, and unfortunately that cost has to be passed on to the customers. So we typically just lower them. And
so what about a press release where you're more in control of what the message is? Is that something the city ever does?
Yes, we do press releases, and depending on the nature of the press release, if it actually gets printed. Discussions like this is where our press releases really come. Fortunately, the media does feel an obligation to at least cover these type of meetings that we have, and this is primarily where our press release, but we do recreational press releases, we do police press releases, and all of those things. Sometimes they're printed, sometimes they're not. And a press release that we're going down in electric rates probably wouldn't. If we're going to go up, they will beat us to the press of the press releases.
What is excuse me? What is a period of time for which the rates will be lowered?
What we're proposing is to lower them now beginning September the 1st, and then whatever else is going to transpire in the next fiscal year with regard to these contract negotiations, this would be essentially a subset of that. So depending on the outcome of these negotiations with OUC and Council's approval of those new contract terms, there may be additional lowering of the rates. The goal is obviously rate stability over the long term, and as Mr. Wright pointed out, they're examining with our rate consultants right now how to achieve that by either taking more reductions now and then a slow rise or leveling it more. I think when you saw the initial results of the PRMG rate study and the various scenarios that we had on OUC, I think that they gave PRMG, our rate consultant, gave you that chart that showed like about a 7-8 year window for the rates, in the base case, et cetera. And the goal always is to keep them, fairly stable and not have huge fluctuations from year to year, or up or down. We've been in that place for the last 2 or 3 years here with the city's rates. I mean, this is the first rate change of any kind that I can recall in November of last year.
Well, we went down a little bit.
And the last one was a downward movement. Yeah. So we've been
that's why I was wondering, is this good just for a month or two or three?
No, that's not the intention.
The OUC business is concluded?
No, this one, after my review of with PRMG, should last for the whole coming year. The question is whether it will also be added to through these other negotiations. But no, we definitely don't recommend, or PRMG and I would not recommend rate reductions that are that short-lived. We like to see, sort of a year-over-year stability. It's the reason, for instance, that you wouldn't take the whole $2 million and try to recover it in 3 months, because then you do have that instability.
So when you say the coming year, you mean the coming fiscal?
The coming fiscal year.
So that would be through September 30th of next year.
Of next year.
Okay.
Correct.
Thank you.
Just so you know, our timing horizons for trying to project these rates is over the 12 years, but we're such a degree day utility that any fluctuations in sales can have an effect. We, at our best guess, over a 3 year, we use 3 years as our average. So over the last 3 years, assuming that would hold true for the next year, this rate stability would be in for that fiscal year. And so that's what we try to use. And so we go back and use the previous 3 years going forward in what they're doing. But it only takes one blimp, for example, having a major freeze in a winter, that throws those calculations off. as to you hit a major peak with additional costs, and then your sales go down and bottom out at the end of the day because everybody turns their heat off. So again, degree days have an effect on the utility itself, but we try to use a 3-year rolling time frame in order to get stability in the rates, and that's one of the things that we attempt to do, is to have the stability over time.
That's where a peaking system would help you.
That is correct.
I'd like to entertain a motion that we accept the reduction in the rate.
I'll second
starting
that.
September 1st.
I'll second that.
I don't know if you can vote. You're an alternate, but that's all right.
I'll second it.
Yeah, all right. I guess I made the motion. Anyway, all those in favor? Any discussion, first of all? I wouldn't think there'd be anybody against it, but all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No. Okay. So you
Thank
have
you.
that. And I'd like a little bit of discussion. You were talking about, Chef was talking about, do we want the electric rates to say sort of level over the next 8 years, to escalate slowly, or what? I mean, he asked if we would give you some indication of what we thought.
The answer is yes, if you have input into that, because we are looking at it, going back to my philosophy, that instant gratification, and then we start back up on a upper treadmill route, is not a real good long term, and I try to view this as a going concern, and so I like the rate stability. That's not to say that I expect to have flat rates over the next 8 years, but at the same time, something that would sort of modify what impacts that we would have given that period of time. There's no question you could do and take a lot of your rate decrease immediately. Your rates fall substantially, and then you start on that upward thing. And an example would be is, let's say that you went down by 12, and then the next year you go up by 3, and the next year by 4, and the next year by 3. Eventually you catch up with what your savings were initially, and as opposed to sort of stabilizing it. But that's, again, a philosophical thing.
I disagree. It's not a philosophical thing. Any business does a present value calculation of what the savings are going to be. The question is, what interest rate do you use to make it reasonable? And I would use something like it's done for municipal pension funds, where they use the long-term municipal rate, 20-year rate, which I think is around, 3.25%, 3.5%, and do a present value of the calculations back. That's the only way you can reasonably come up with numbers. The way any business does their capital budgeting, I assume you look at present values and doing your own capital budgeting. That's the only way that you can do it, because otherwise you can come up with 1,000 different scenarios. You have to derive it back to a number, and you are making the assumption that your population of your ratepayers stays constant over time. But I think that's reasonable. It should be engendered to the long-term residents, and not give somebody that's only going to live here a year a big savings in the upfront year, and then the people that are living here the rest of their lives take it on the chin on the back side.
Actually, that was just 2 seconds. The presentation that was made by our rate consultant in conjunction with Mr. Wright a few months ago, when the different alternatives were being examined with an eye toward deciding about the RFP, included exactly that. There were present value calculations of each of the options for comparison, which actually drove the decision making, as well as a chart from PRMG which showed the rates over time across the 8 years for the assumptions that were made on the net present value. So that was the approach that was taken last time, when there was some conversation about which way to go. So I would assume that is what they're planning to do again, just as a comment.
Yeah, but so from what you're saying, essentially, is that we ought to ask them to do a somewhat level rate as best you can. Obviously, things are going to change over time because you don't know everything. But instead of taking all of the savings to start with and then ramping up faster, take less of a savings to start with and don't ramp up as fast.
And The answer to the question is yes, but I think the net present value is exactly what we need to run that calculation. I think just intuitively you think that it would reach and it would support some type of levelization. The degree of a levelization, I guess, is the issue.
I would think
and
that calculation tell you how much you can reduce it, but that doesn't tell you whether you want to do it one way or the other.
Well, if you draw the conclusion based on business,
mathematical calculations will tell you that.
If it becomes a business decision, the answer to the question is the net present value will tell you exactly how to do it because it becomes a cost issue.
Yeah, but it's still, is it going to tell you whether you want to go straight or whether you want to ramp up over time?
It will tell you. Yeah, it will give you the degree of slope.
Well, then why do you want us to tell you which way to go?
Because in my world, believe it or not, and Mr. Chairman, I know this is hard for anybody to conceive, there are some political issues that are taken into consideration in decision making. All that being said, if we want to do the mathematical equation, Cindy can handle that deal. That's not an issue. So we're just trying to get input from the community. There may be somebody there that's 99 years old and says, I'm only going to make it through the next year, right. So I'd like to have all my value next year. And then there are some people that think they're going to live forever, like myself, and I like the stabilization over time.
Yeah, I think the trick is what interest rate to use. If you use a high interest rate, then that'll drive, you'll want to have all the savings forward. If you use a lower interest rate, then it can be spread out over time. And that's why I think if you use an interest rate that's similar to the way municipal pension funds or plans are being looked at under new GASB rules.
Exactly, but and Mr. Wright is no longer here, but it's my understanding that the discount rate that they're using to evaluate this has actually been
agreed to with OUC because it's the same one that they're using. I don't know
what
it is.
What's that number?
I don't know what it is off the top of my head. I can certainly go and find him, but I believe that's part of the conversation.
And I think it's 4.
Something in that neighborhood. It's down in the 3.5, 4 range, I believe.
Yeah. I want to say 4.2 is the number that one of the calculations.
That sounds reasonable to me. I was in the bond business for 35 years, so
okay.
I have some expertise in that.
Yeah, there was one in which we were utilizing ours and that of OUCs and trying to reach the middle ground.
Are there other costs associated with stabilization, if you will? I mean, I think people understand that the cost of fuel goes up and down. They put gas in their cars. Then we had, on the one hand, then we had, on the other hand, the FMPA, I suppose, trying to stabilize, in effect, the rates or lower them, losing more than $250 million. So I guess I would ask, what is the cost of stabilization beyond the interest rates? That issue's already been raised.
I don't think there is a cost. What you're doing is you're taking a defined calculation and applying it. Any of those other variables would take place anyway. In other words, fuel pricing, the fuel mix that the utility is going to utilizes, the degree days that you're serving your customers, the amount of sales that you have. So those variables are going to be in there no matter what you do. I think what we are talking about is taking that the finite supply of power supply and that cost over time.
Okay, thank you, Jim.
So do you want to, what do you want from us? Do you want to question of whether we want level or?
I primarily wanted to make you understand the discussions that are taking place. And I think I'm taking away from here the mathematical calculation is a very important process to use in our calculations of which option or alternative we take.
Yes, I think it's the cost of stabilization, in my opinion.
Yeah, and we will, and I'll mention that to Chef and Bill also about that. But it's my understanding what we're doing is calculating a finite, defined number over time.
All right. Any other? Okay, in my matters, you want to get back up again?
Sure.
There was a gas leak just next door yesterday. How much gas distribution system do we have, and is that part of our utilities?
No, it is not part of our utilities. It was the gas company, is my understanding, hit their own gas line, and we had to block off the street. It was probably a contractor, it probably wasn't the gas company itself, but they hit in there. We have very limited gas within the corporate
They're
limits.
advertising like mad. But
They are, and part of their advertising, if you read the fine print, they will serve you gas wherever you want it if you run the line.
I know, at $10 a foot.
I don't know what the number is, but
Well, that's what they told me, because we looked at it.
yeah. Well, and we looked at it, and there was a discussion about trying to serve the airport area because it is, an added resource. But to their cost of running from 95 down was pretty expensive.
Well, they actually have a line on the west side of Indian River Boulevard. But I've talked to people that say
I've just been told when we talk to the city gas is that we have very limited here. They would like to build, and they are building a backbone going down 95, and then eventually would like to come into the city of Vero Beach and up the beach area and be able to do a loop and have that service. And that's in their long-range plan. But like a lot of utilities, if they can get someone else to pay for the expansion, then they obviously will be ready to expand.
Okay, one other question. In Tom Hardy's Vero Communicate, the last one, they talked about the Orca system and Lobo that are out there, and the fact that we're looking at pollution where it comes in the lagoon, but nobody's using the information. Nobody seems to be using it. Are we looking at it to see if what we're doing in the city?
We don't have any of those Orca things out there, and you got to remember we're in the very infantile stage of this, so we don't really have anything. I think there's enough information that we can get background as to what's in the lagoon now, but our improvement's going to be over time.
Just input on that. Both of those sensing devices are in real time and online for everyone to access.
Okay.
Which makes it really interesting if you access it and watch it during like rain events. So it could be, maybe give some input to Bill in his stormwater
Calculations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We would do that.
And you can have this.
All right.
So before we adjourn.
I was going to say, any members got
Thank you. I'd just like to talk about the FP&L thing just a little bit.
All right.
For the FP&L, I think each of you received some information about the FP&L power plant proposal in Okeechobee. And I just want to bring it up because I think it's an opportunity for the city to give some input to maybe long-range water planning. Because just to give you some concept of the quantities, I think the quantity that FP&L is applying for to pull out of the same water supply that we're using, it's about equivalent to what the entire county uses per day. And so we do have, this is my opinion, maybe Rob or someone else would want to pipe up, but there is an opportunity when these permits are applied for the city to make a comment about this could be a threat to our water supply. And there are alternatives. That's the most important thing, I think, is that for this power plant to be applying for a permit to pull this vast quantity of water out of the public water supply, there are other alternatives. Like in that same vicinity, I mentioned that Central Florida Planning Initiative before, that St. John's Water Management is in the process of putting together a water plan, and a big part of their planning initiative is water farming or building big reservoirs to hold water because they know water is going to be a big issue in Florida. And there's already been an entire engineering and so forth, a feasibility study done by a private utility called Groveland Utilities, which is very close. It's like within 6 miles of this FP&L facility. And, there is the possibility that they could at least utilize surface water as opposed to using water from the aquifer. So there are some other possibilities, and I just think it's an opportunity for the city to protect its long-term water supply. I believe we're moving towards using more of the Floridan aquifer as opposed to using the superficial aquifer, and so it's important. And I mean, I'm assuming everybody looked at the materials, and the South Florida Water Management District has developed a model for water planning, and it has been peer-reviewed and tweaked and tested, and I don't believe anybody has actually put this information into the model to see what effect it would have, and that would be something else we could ask for, is to input this withdrawal and see what it does to the neighboring ag wells and the municipal water supply.
I mean, we need to monitor what's going on with the FPL. Even though it's over in Okeechobee, you're talking about the Floridan aquifer. So the Floridan aquifer is one large aquifer, and every time you drill down and put a straw in it and start pulling water out of it, you can affect other users, especially users that are agricultural users that don't necessarily pump the water out. They just turn a valve and they expect it to come out on ground surface. So when you start lowering the pressures in the aquifer, it can have an effect on ag users. You also have blue cypress, any of the springs that are in the area that receive water source from the Floridan aquifer can get affected. They're looking at withdrawing 9 million gallons of water a day. That's the equivalent of 250 to 300,000 homes that would supply water to. So I think St. John's and South Florida and all of them in that area, where all those water management districts come together, they're starting to work together to make sure that what one person's doing on one side of the line doesn't affect the other person on the other side of the line. So, as we move through this process, the city needs to make sure that our interest is protected, because right now we're withdrawing, roughly 2.3 million gallons of water out of the Floridan aquifer per day, but 30 years or 20 years from now, we're probably going to be up around 5.4 million as we switch our demands from superficial water to the Floridan aquifer. We already have a consumptive use permit to do that. We need to make sure that what they do doesn't affect us. I know when we were going through the consumptive use permit process, we were almost thrown into a water caution area because of some of the population projections that they had for areas along 192 up in the, and from there all the way up to Cocoa. And the Central Florida, East Central Florida Services, we was looking at, growth in the Harmony Farms, all the St. Cloud area, and that was going to have an effect on us. So you don't think, or a lot of people say, oh, well, that's out west. It's not really going to affect us. We do need to make sure that it doesn't.
And Rob, if I'm correct, it also affects our water quality, which affects our pocketbook, because if there's a lot of water drawn out, then we start getting more solids in our water, right? Mm-hmm. And so then the more solids, like the more saline, the more chemical, the more I'm not a chemist.
If you look at the Florida aquifer, the salinity is dense, so it's going to drop. So the lower in the aquifer itself, there's a lens in there of real fresh water. As you start pulling and depleting that, then you're going to start drawing up the salinity.
And then our treatment is more expensive, right?
Yes.
Because the more that's in it, the more it costs us to treat it.
The tighter the membrane has to be, the higher the pressures that have to drive it through that membrane, the higher the power costs to treat the same amount of water. Yes.
But that 9 million gallons, it doesn't all disappear. How do they dispose of it?
And then it gets deep.
They're going to inject it down in the. And I have just the literature that Judy provided to me. It looks like they recirculate just like our cooling tower at the power plant recirculates, and then they blow down when the concentrations get up too high. Then they blow down to us, and it gets returned. The reused water gets returned to us and gets filtered again. In their case, what they'll do is they'll inject it down into the.
So they're going to put an injection well.
They're going to put an injection well to get rid of it. Now, I don't know how many times or if the numbers they were saying from what I grasped, it was they were going to be going through 9 million gallons of water per day. So you're going to have this withdrawal rate of 9 million gallons a day every day for it. So and like you said, I mean, the Groveland utility, they started probably discussions 3-4 years ago about water farming, and they're they're a source that if they can use that water, which is a stormwater source that's usually going to tide or something else, that benefits the whole water picture for that area and for us and for the state. So,
but FP&L won't do it without a bit of public uproar, a bit of pressure, because
FPL, just like INEOS, is a company. They're going to do the cheapest that they can.
And the cheapest thing is just to get the
like
consumptive
INEOS,
use permit, right?
But that's why you have governing agencies like St. John's in South Florida and everybody else, because just like INEOS, they wanted to use the water source, and then they made them put reuse in, and they made them go to these other lesser sources of water. And you're going to see the same through St. John's. It's just you need to watch them and make sure that it's happening.
To them.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Except FPL has deeper pockets to lobby.
Yes.
And so generally what FPL wants is what FPL gets.
Yeah.
So I think that means we need to be a lot more proactive
verbal, right.
and a lot more assertive.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to get buy-in by other communities who draw from the same aquifer, because they're all going to be affected to some extent.
Yes. Yeah, I don't think right now they're probably flying under the radar with a lot of it, because even when the county was going to expand their well field, they had the ag users rose up and said, "Hey, wait a minute, how are you going to affect us?" And what was that?
It's all aboard Florida revisiting.
Well, I think it's a benefit. I mean, you look at their investment that they are doing with the pipeline all the way down through the center of the state for gas, and it makes sense that they would build their plants close to their new pipeline that they're doing. Right. So you need to make sure that the water supply, I mean, there's plenty of surface water. So,
right. And the surface water actually benefits the lagoon, because if they keep this water from, the ag, nitrogen-laden ag polluted water from going to the lagoon by holding it, letting it trickle through. There's a stormwater treatment area that's part of these reservoir. So it's a win-win.
And they'll probably have to have a backup of Florida water
exactly.
when needed.
You have to have a backup.
For drought purposes, you
Yep.
can't take a power plant offline.
Right,
So,
right.
yeah. Okay.
Anybody else have anything for the good of the? I've got one little item that I picked up some time ago, but you talk about coal and gas and the new EPA ruling that was just promulgated. And actually in Florida, more CO2 has come out of gas than coal, and most of it actually comes out of petroleum. The cars, the gas, everything else generates more CO2 than anything that produces electricity. So.
That's why we have trains coming.
Huh?
That's why we have trains coming.
Yeah, right. The next meeting is a joint meeting, and I understand from talking to Peter Gorey of the Finance Commission, if the contract with OUC is not completed by August 31st, is there any use to have that meeting?
And I believe he asked the same question at the Finance Commission, and I think the conclusion was it may not be justified unless there's something to review at that point, because you had it set up for another purpose, and it was just right. But he did say that he would like to keep, in his discussion with me, keep in his back pocket that he could have an emergency meeting. But
he could have one when you get a contract.
Yeah.
All right, then we should have a meeting.
Yeah.
But tentatively it's set for August 31st.
Correct. And I think you ought to keep that date on the calendar until maybe a week before, just in case.
Okay. Actually, I'll be out of town, but
Could it be within that time, August 31st? How quickly is it moving along, if you know?
well, you said
Laura,
the
if I
contract might
was,
be in
if
about November.
it's within my scope, we would have it on the council agenda August the 18th.
You think you're going to have it that soon?
What I think and what happens, so two different things, but that in our discussions that we had on that Thursday afternoon, that was what we shook hands on. That was going to be our goal. That's the reason, as Chef said, that OUC did, on a handshake, concede that the rates could go into effect October the 1st with or without the transmission taken care of, if we could get an agreement and a contract signed. We talked about net present value, just to put it into scope, and one of the concerns that I have had and voiced to others is that we've been talking about this thing for 16, 17 months. If we would have taken that November deal, put a net present value on the savings from that November deal to present, it would go a long way to justify the rates not even being as low as what we got in there. But and I guess the whole scheme of things, in my opinion, let's just say yes or no. You know, from OUC's standpoint, they're very happy with the existing contract. Worst case scenario, we continue to pay the rates that we're paying now. The best case is a deal that we think we can live with a shorter, and there's two options, or two things here. One, it's a shorter tenure than our existing contract.
It's 8 years.
8 years. And the second thing is you get rate relief quicker than if you sit here and debate, discuss, and go back. And eventually, 15 years from now, they'll probably cut us a real good deal.
So then you're talking about you're going to present it to the city council before we see it.
No, he said he'd like to.
I would like to.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. No
Well, that's what I'm
offense
saying.
to this. No offense to this commission, but the answer is I would like to have the document that I could say to the city council, we would recommend that this be signed.
Okay. I mean,
That's
we could
an
have a meeting.
ideal
We could have a
world.
meeting earlier too.
Yeah, yeah. But I will tell you, it's going to take some time to implement a rate decrease. We can't go back to OUC and say, I want this to start October the 1st, and it happens to be September the 30th. It doesn't work that way. It's sort of like turning the power plant off. If we say October the 1st, we no longer rely on that plant. It's not like we go flip a switch and everybody goes home and life is good. We've got a lot of materials in there that are going to have to be taken out. It's going to go into a decommissioned position, and that takes time, and it takes people. So, it's one of those, and I realize that there's going to be the cynical people that are saying, oh, you're rushing it. The fact of the matter is, the 4 years that we've been going through this exercise, if we call that rush, I don't, it just, and we can talk about it in another 4 years. OUC's very, very happy with what they've got. It's really what we are unhappy with.
Yeah. All right. Anything else? Otherwise, the meeting is adjourned.